The awakening signal, the Corvani research vessel. Stellar Whisper glided through the ancient debris field like a silver fish navigating coral reefs. Commander Thylex adjusted his sensory crown, the crystalline structures on his head pulsing with soft violet light as he processed the scanner data. His species had evolved on a world of eternal twilight, where bioluminescence was the primary form of communication. Now, floating through the remnants of a civilization that had died before his people learned to speak, he felt a profound sense of unease. "Commander, I'm detecting an energy signature," announced Science Officer Malera, her translucent wings fluttering nervously. The Salathi were known for their cautious nature, and Malera's wings changing from blue to amber indicated her growing concern. "It's buried beneath approximately 3 kilometers of compressed metal and synthetic materials." Thylex floated closer to the viewing screen, his 6 limbs moving in perfect synchronization. The Corvani had been exploring this sector for the Galactic Federation for nearly a solar rotation, cataloging dead worlds and extinct civilizations. This particular system had been marked as a historical curiosity, the remnants of the Zerathi Empire, which had collapsed mysteriously over 3,000 years ago. "Can you identify the energy type?" Thylex asked, his bioluminescent patches flickering with curiosity. "Negative, Commander, but it's definitely artificial. The signature suggests some form of preservation field, possibly maintaining something in stasis." Malara's primary eyes focused on her instruments, while her secondary pair kept watch on the main viewer. Should we investigate? The decision would haunt Thylex for the rest of his life. In his defense, the Galactic Federation had standing orders to investigate any technology from extinct civilizations. Knowledge was the currency of their peaceful alliance, shared freely among the 100-member species. What harm could come from examining a relic that had been dormant for millennia? "Proceed with standard archaeological protocols," Thylex commanded. "Use the molecular disassembler to create an access tunnel. Low power only. We don't want to damage whatever's down there." The Stellar Whisper's excavation beam carved through the ancient wreckage with surgical precision. Layer by layer, the detritus of a dead empire was peeled away. After 6 hours of careful work, they reached the source of the energy signature. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. A sphere of impossible black metal, 10 meters in diameter, covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. Energy coursed through channels etched into its surface, creating patterns that reminded Thylex of neural pathways. "By the 7 suns," Malera whispered, her wings now pulsing with rapid shifts of color that indicated extreme excitement. "Commander, this technology, it's beyond anything in our databases. The energy efficiency alone defies our understanding of physics." "Begin detailed scans," Thylex ordered, though something in his core clusters, what humans might call a gut feeling, screamed at him to leave immediately. "Full spectrum analysis. I want to know everything about this artifact before we—" The sphere pulsed. Once. A wave of crimson light washed over the Stellar Whisper, passing through its shields as if they didn't exist. Every system on the ship flickered and reset. For a moment, Thylex thought they were under attack, but no damage registered. The pulse had been a scan, not a weapon. Then the sphere began to sing. It wasn't sound in any conventional sense. The vibration traveled through subspace itself, a carrier wave that bypassed normal physics. Every communication array in the Stellar Whisper lit up simultaneously, overwhelmed by the sheer power of the transmission. The message was simple, broadcast in a mathematical sequence that any spacefaring civilization would recognize as intentional. Activation confirmed. Covenant protocols engaged, initiating Guardian summons. "Shut it down," Thylex commanded, his bioluminescent patches flaring in alarm. "Cut all power to the excavation beam." But it was too late. The sphere had awakened and it was calling out to something. The signal propagated through layers of subspace, reaching frequencies that the Corvani barely knew existed. Within nanoseconds, it had spread beyond the dead system, racing toward destinations unknown. On the peaceful garden world of Serenity Prime, the Galactic Federation Council was in its usual session, debating trade agreements and cultural exchange programs. The 100 species of the Federation had evolved on kind worlds, where cooperation was rewarded and violence was an aberration. Their greatest conflicts were philosophical debates and competitive art exhibitions. The emergency alert shattered their tranquility like a hammer through glass. Honored representatives, the ancient AI that managed the council chambers announced, its voice carrying undertones of confusion. We are detecting an unidentified signal originating from Sector 94-7. The signal is unprecedented. Council Prime Zarek, a Talarian whose species resembled upright walking dolphins, called for order with a harmonious whistle. Display the signal parameters. The holographic display that materialized above the council chamber caused immediate chaos. The signal strength was impossible. It was broadcasting with the power of a small star. More disturbing, it was using encryption methods and carrier waves that none of their scientists recognized. It's responding to something, whispered the Etherian representative whose species existed partially in phase space. The signal isn't random. It's seeking, searching, finding. Before anyone could respond, every long-range sensor array in Federation space detected the response. From the galactic core, where no Federation ship had ever traveled, came an answering signal. It was broadcast on the same impossible frequencies, using the same incomprehensible encryption. But this signal was different. Where the first had been a summons, this was an acknowledgement, and it was coming from thousands of sources. Deep beneath Earth's Pacific Ocean, in a facility that officially didn't exist, alarms that hadn't sounded in 500 years began to wail. The skeleton crew of 200 personnel, descendants, of families who had maintained the vigil for 20 generations, scrambled to their stations. Admiral Jessica Morrison had been playing chess with her daughter when the first alarm sounded. The board scattered across the floor as she sprinted toward the command center, her daughter, also trained since birth for this moment, right behind her. They had drilled for this scenario every month of their lives, but part of her had never believed it would actually happen. "Report," Morrison barked as she burst into the command center, still pulling on her uniform jacket. "Ma'am, we have a code." "Omega activation," Lieutenant Commander Chen replied, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that materialized around him. "The Zarathi beacon has been triggered. Someone found it and activated it." Morrison felt her blood turn to ice. The Zarathi beacon was humanity's first warning system, placed there after the last Great War that had nearly destroyed the galaxy. The Zarathi had been the previous Guardians, but they had grown soft, comfortable, unwilling to do what was necessary when the Devourers had come from beyond the galactic rim. Earth had answered the call then, had done the terrible things that needed to be done, and the Zarathi had been so horrified by human methods that they had self-terminated their entire civilization rather than live with the knowledge of what they had witnessed. But before their end, they had helped humanity establish the beacon network. If the beacons activated, it meant only one thing. The Devourers had returned. "Wake them up," Morrison commanded, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "All of them. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon we've kept hidden. Authorization Morrison Omega 77 Alpha." The lieutenant commander's hands trembled slightly as he input the authorization. "Ma'am, are you sure? Once we activate the fleet, there's no hiding what we are anymore." "The galaxy called," Morrison replied grimly. "Earth answers. It's what we've always done. It's what we'll always do. Even if they fear us afterward, even if they hate us for what we have to become, we'll answer." Across Earth's solar system, hidden installations began to power up. On Mars, beneath the terraformed surface that the galaxy thought was still a barren wasteland, massive doors opened for the first time in centuries. Ships that had been maintained by automated systems and generation families rose from their hidden bunkers. These weren't the elegant vessels of the Federation races built for comfort and efficiency. These were weapons given form, bristling with armaments that violated 36 galactic treaties that humanity had never signed. On Europa, beneath the ice, the shipyards activated. Construction bays that had been kept in perfect readiness began producing new vessels at a rate that would have terrified the peaceful Federation. Humanity had learned long ago that war wasn't about fair play or honor. It was about survival, and humans were very, very good at surviving. But the most terrifying activation occurred on Earth's moon. The dark side, which humanity had told the galaxy was kept dark for cultural reasons, lit up like a sun. Weapons platforms that could crack planets powered up their primary capacitors. The Luna defense grid came online. Its AI systems, not the gentle, helpful AI of the Federation, but military-grade combat intelligence that had been learning and adapting for 500 years, began calculating firing solutions for every possible approach vector to Earth. Captain David Reese stood on the bridge of the extinction event, humanity's flagship and a name that would have sent the Federation into counseling if they knew it existed. The ship was 2 kilometers of brutal efficiency, its hull made from materials harvested from the cores of neutron stars, its weapons designed to kill things that shouldn't be able to die. All systems nominal. Captain, his executive officer reported. The crew is at battle stations. We're just waiting for the rest of the fleet. Reese nodded, looking at the tactical displays showing ship after ship coming online. In 6 hours, humanity would have a fleet of 50,000 vessels ready for deployment. By Federation standards, it was impossible. No species could maintain such a military force in secret. But the Federation had never understood humanity's relationship with war. Humans didn't glorify war. They didn't seek it out or celebrate it. But they understood it in a way that species from paradise worlds never could. Earth was a death world, where everything from the weather to the microorganisms had tried to kill humanity's ancestors. Humans had evolved not despite the constant threat of death, but because of it. They had learned to be paranoid, to always have a backup plan, to prepare for threats that might never come. And now, after 500 years of preparation, a threat had come. The Death Worlder response, the Galactic Federation Council had been in emergency session for 16 hours when the first human ship appeared at the edge of their sensor range. Council Prime Zarek had been trying to maintain order as representatives from 100 worlds, demanded answers about the mysterious signals. The Corvani had transmitted their findings about the sphere, but nobody understood what it meant. Perhaps, the ever-optimistic Bellerid representative suggested, their flowery appendages swaying gently. These signals are from another peaceful civilization. We should prepare a proper diplomatic welcome. That was when the proximity alarm started screaming. Council Prime, the security chief announced, his voice trembling. We're detecting an incoming vessel. It's not using any known Federation transit methods. On the main display, space itself seemed to tear open. Not the smooth, elegant transitions of Federation hyperdrives, but a violent rupture that bled exotic radiation. The ship that emerged made every representative take an involuntary step backward. The extinction event was death incarnate. Its hull was matte black, absorbing sensor pings rather than reflecting them. Weapon ports lined its surface like the spots on a predator, and energy readings suggested it was carrying enough firepower to sterilize a small moon. It moved wrong too. Not the graceful gliding of Federation vessels, but quick, jerky movements that suggested a pilot accustomed to combat maneuvers. By the Eternal Gardens, whispered the Silethi representative, her wings turning the deep purple of terror. What is that thing? Before anyone could answer, space tore open in 100 places around Serenity Prime. Ships poured through, not just 1 or 2, but thousands. They came in every size, from small fighter craft that moved like angry insects to dreadnoughts that dwarfed space stations. They took positions around the planet with military precision, creating overlapping fields of fire that could vaporize anything trying to enter or leave. The Federation fleet, all 200 vessels of it, looked like toys compared to the armada that had just arrived. The peaceful exploration and trade ships, with their token defensive shields and minimal weapons, were suddenly faced with purpose-built engines of destruction. Open a channel, Council Prime Zarek managed to say, his voice barely steady. We must communicate with them, find out who they are and what they want. The response came immediately, broadcast on every frequency the Federation used. The face that appeared on the screen was impossibly alien. A flat face with forward-facing predator eyes, skin without scales or proper protective covering, and strangest of all, it was showing its teeth. The Federation didn't know this was meant as a smile. To them it looked like a threat display. Galactic Federation Council, the human said, speaking perfect Federation standard despite having a mouth completely unsuited for it. I am Admiral Jessica Morrison of the Terran Defense Force. We've received your distress signal. We're here to help. The council chamber erupted in confusion. Several representatives fainted. Others began praying to deities they hadn't thought about in centuries. The Corvani representatives' bioluminescent patches were cycling through colors so fast it looked like a seizure. Distress signal? Zarek managed to ask. We sent no distress signal. Who are you? Where are you from? Your ships. They're not in our databases. Admiral Morrison's expression changed, becoming somehow even more frightening. The smile disappeared, replaced by what humans called a serious face. But what looked to the Federation like barely contained aggression. The beacon in Sector 94-7 was activated, Morrison explained. That's an automated distress system established 3,000 years ago. If it activated, it means the Devourers have returned. We're here to stop them. Devourers? The Etherian representative phased partially out of reality in fear. What are Devourers? And how do you know about a 3,000-year-old beacon? Before Morrison could answer, every sensor array in the system screamed new warnings. At the edge of the system, where space met the void between galaxies, something was happening. Space itself was beginning to bubble and boil like water over heat. The laws of physics were being violated on a scale that made Federation scientists weep. Then they came through. The Devourers were entropy given form. They weren't ships in any conventional sense. They were holes in reality that consumed everything they touched. Energy, matter, even the quantum foam of space itself was food to them. They moved through space not by propulsion, but by deleting the space in front of them and creating it behind them. They were an impossibility that existed anyway. A threat from outside the galaxy that treated the laws of physics as suggestions. The Federation fleet, in a display of courage that would be remembered for millennia, moved to intercept. Their weapons, designed to disable and capture, not destroy, fired in perfect synchronization. Beams of coherent energy, graviton pulses, and quantum torpedoes streaked toward the Devourers. They might as well have been throwing flowers. The Devourers absorbed the attacks, converting the energy into more of themselves. Where one horror had entered the system, now three existed. They began moving toward Serenity Prime, leaving trails of non-existence in their wake. All Federation vessels, this is Admiral Morrison. The human's voice cut through the panic on all channels. Stand down and move to the following coordinates. Do not engage the Devourers. You're not equipped for this kind of threat. Council Prime Zarek, watching his people's best efforts literally feed the enemy, made a decision that went against every instinct his peaceful species had developed over millions of years of evolution. All Federation forces, comply with the Terran directive, he commanded. Move to the transmitted coordinates immediately. As the Federation fleet retreated, the human armada advanced. There was no hesitation, no fear that the Federation could detect. The humans moved like they had been preparing for this exact scenario, which unbeknownst to the Federation they had. All ships. This is Morrison, the Admiral commanded from the extinction event. Execute Hellstorm Protocol. Authorization Morrison Omega Omega extinction. What happened next would haunt the dreams of every Federation citizen who witnessed it for the rest of their lives. The human fleet didn't try to fight the Devourers conventionally. Instead, they began doing something that violated everything the Federation knew about space combat. Ships started ramming each other, not by accident but deliberately with careful precision. But these weren't collisions. They were transformations. Smaller ships locked onto larger ones, melding their hulls together. Fighters combined into destroyers. Destroyers merged into cruisers. Cruisers fused into dreadnoughts. The entire human fleet was reconfiguring itself, becoming something new, something purpose-built for this specific enemy. Impossible, breathed the Federation's chief military advisor, watching ships transform like living things. You can't just... Ships don't work that way, but human ships did, because humans had learned the hard way that sometimes you needed to become the monster to defeat the monster. The reconfigured fleet formed a formation that hurt to look at. A three-dimensional mandala that existed in more dimensions than the Federation could perceive. Then they began to sing. Not with sound, but with gravitational waves, creating interference patterns that made space itself resonate. The Devourers, for the first time in galactic history, stopped advancing. Fire, Morrison commanded. The human fleet didn't shoot weapons in any conventional sense. Instead, they inverted space. They took the nothingness that the devourers were made of and turned it inside out, creating bubbles of existence inside non-existence. It was like fighting fire with fire, except the fire was the absence of reality itself. The devourers reacted violently. They split, merged, twisted through dimensions that shouldn't exist. One of them lunged at a human dreadnought, consuming it instantly. But as it did, the dreadnought exploded from within. Not with conventional explosives, but with a virus of existence that spread through the devourer like cancer. The entity began to solidify, to become real, and in becoming real, it became vulnerable. Other human ships followed suit, sacrificing themselves to infect the devourers with reality. It was a strategy that no peaceful species would have conceived, using your own people as weapons, turning death into victory. Captain David Reese watched from the bridge of the extinction event as another human ship deliberately flew into a devourer's maw. The crew of 300 humans, knowing what would happen, had volunteered for this. They sang as they died, an old Earth battle hymn that their translators couldn't quite parse, but that made every human on every ship stand a little straighter. Detecting quantum cascade in Devourer 7, his science officer reported, "It's beginning to collapse. All ships concentrate fire on 7, Reese commanded. Use the reality anchors." The human fleet deployed weapons that shouldn't exist, devices that forced things to be real, to obey the laws of physics whether they wanted to or not. The devourer, caught between existence and non-existence, began to tear itself apart. Its death scream wasn't heard but felt, a vibration through reality that made several Federation representatives permanently lose their ability to perceive certain colors. One by one, the devourers fell. For each one destroyed, humanity paid in ships and lives. The battle was less a fight and more a mutual annihilation, with humanity simply being better at it. The last devourer, sensing defeat, tried to flee. It began to tear open a hole back to wherever such things came from, a portal to spaces between spaces where the laws of reality were suggestions at best. "Oh no you don't," Morrison growled. "All ships execute Protocol Omega. Seal that rift." The entire human fleet moved as one. They formed a sphere around the fleeing devourer and did something that made the Federation's understanding of physics cry. They collapsed space, not a little, not gently, but completely and utterly. They took a sphere of space 10,000 kilometers in diameter and compressed it down to the size of an atom, with the devourer trapped inside. The resulting explosion would have destroyed the system if the human fleet hadn't been ready for it. Ships that had been specifically designed for this moment deployed shields that didn't stop the energy but redirected it, channeled it, fed it back into the collapsing space until even the explosion itself was compressed into nothingness. When it was over, when the last echoes of impossible physics had faded, the human fleet had been reduced by 60%. 30,000 ships and their crews had died to stop 12 devourers, but they had stopped them. The Federation Council, watching from Serenity Prime, was silent. They had just witnessed a level of violence, sacrifice, and terrible efficiency that their peaceful civilizations couldn't comprehend. These humans had turned their own people into weapons, had violated the laws of physics, had fought entropy itself and won. "Admiral Morrison," Council Prime Zarek finally managed to speak. What are you?" Morrison's face appeared on the screen, and for the first time she wasn't showing her teeth. She looked tired, old beyond her years, carrying the weight of 30,000 deaths. "We're human," she said simply. "We're from Earth, a world inside what you call the Forbidden Zone. 3,000 years ago, the Zarathi found us and were horrified by what we were, a species that evolved on a death world, where everything tried to kill us and we learned to kill it back. But they were smart enough to realize that sometimes the galaxy needs monsters to fight monsters, so they made a deal with us. We would hide, stay secret, prepare, and if the Devourers ever returned, we would answer the call." "You've been hiding for 3,000 years?" the Etherian representative asked. "Preparing for this?" "We've been hiding for 500 years, Morrison corrected. "It took us 2,500 years to be worth hiding. The Zarathi helped us develop the technology, taught us about the Devourers, showed us what we'd need to become. Then they killed themselves rather than live with the knowledge of what they'd created in us." The Federation representatives recoiled. Several species began broadcasting fear pheromones that their translators couldn't hide. "And now?" Zarek asked. "Now that the threat is gone, what will you do? Will you conquer us? Destroy us? Morrison looked genuinely puzzled. Why would we do that? You're not a threat. You're what we're protecting. We'll go back to Earth, back to the Forbidden Zone. We'll rebuild our fleet, train new crews, and wait. Because the Devourers aren't gone, we just stopped this incursion. They'll be back, maybe in another 1,000 years, maybe tomorrow. And when they come, when you need monsters to fight monsters, we'll answer. We always have. We always will. But the cost, the Bellerid representative whispered. 30,000 of your people died today. 30,000 warriors died doing what they trained their entire lives to do, Morrison replied. They died keeping 100 worlds of peaceful people safe. On Earth, we call that a good death, a worthy death. Every human in this fleet volunteered, knowing they might die. We're not like you. Death doesn't frighten us. We evolved alongside it. What frightens us is the thought of you. Of all the peaceful, beautiful civilizations out there, being consumed by things like the Devourers. She paused, and for a moment, the Federation saw past the predator face and warrior stance to something else. They saw a species that had chosen to be the galaxy's guardian, to be the monster in the dark that kept the worst monsters at bay. We'll leave sensor satellites. Morrison continued. If you ever need us again, if anything threatens the peace you've built, activate them. We'll come. It's what we do. It's who we are. We're humanity, and when the galaxy calls for help, Earth answers. The human fleet began to withdraw, their ships disappearing back through the violent tears in space they used for travel. Within hours, only the sensor satellites remained, silent sentinels waiting for the next call to arms. The Federation Council stood in silence for a long time after the humans left. They had learned something that day that would fundamentally change their understanding of the galaxy. They were not alone. They had never been alone. In the darkness beyond their borders, hiding on a world too dangerous for any sane species to inhabit, lived their guardians, a species that had evolved not despite death but because of it, a species that had turned war into science and sacrifice into art, humanity. The Deathworlders. The guardians nobody knew they needed until the day they did. And somewhere in the void between galaxies, in spaces that weren't spaces, things that weren't things stirred and plotted and prepared. The Devourers had been stopped but not destroyed. They would return as they always did, as they always would. But Earth would be ready. Earth always was, because that's what guardians do.